Well, hello, Arizona Superman 1. Thanks for the video response here. Been enjoying this discussion quite a bit here. Now, you raised quite a number of interesting objections to my last video, though, but nothing that I haven't already heard before and can't answer here. The first thing I want to clear up is the misunderstanding here, because throughout your video you kept on saying that I admitted that the whole idea of the cause being personal, timeless, spaceless, and all that doesn't follow at all from the argument here. No, that's not quite what I meant here. And you also said that I admitted that was disingenuous of Craig and everything. I didn't say that either. I never said it was disingenuous, and I don't appreciate you putting words in my mouth like that. Though I will admit, the way I phrased that wasn't very well. That was a poor choice of words on my part when I said it doesn't strictly follow. What I mean is this here. The idea, once we get to the point of the argument that says the universe has a cause, the next logical step in the argument is to then ask, what properties does the cause of the universe possess? And that's when you get to that whole thing. That's not something that's added on to the argument. It's a part of the argument. In fact, in any work you find of Craig's defense of this argument will include this step. This is a logical step in the argument, which is why if you read his article in the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, you'll find two additional premises to the argument. It is part of the argument. It's not just this separate thing. It's part of the Kalam argument. You know, premise 4, which I have it linked in the description, not linked, but I have it written down in the description section, though. So yes, it is a part of the argument, and yeah, the way I phrased that, I can see why you might thought I was admitting that it doesn't follow from the argument, but it does, because it's a part of the argument. It's the next logical step, so I apologize for that. But now, with that misunderstanding hopefully being cleared up, let's move on to your objections. Now, on to your objections here. Now, the interesting thing I should point out to your first set of objections here is that these objections against the idea of timeless, spaceless, personal being isn't so much an objection against the Kalam argument as is a positive argument for atheism. Because as far as I was able to tell, you didn't seem to dispute that the cause would be timeless or spaceless. What you instead did was you gave a separate argument to try and show that these attributes are incoherent. So that should be an interesting thing to note here. Now, that being said here, I still don't think your objections work, and here's why. Now, in response to the idea of the being timeless, you simply said that well, what does it mean to exist in time? We exist in time right now and then. So for God to exist in time, for it to exist outside of time, means that he must exist nowhere. Well, first let me explain something here. If time does exist, which of course it does, and God exists outside of time, then I would agree with you that's incoherent. But I think God does exist in time. And what do I mean by this? I hold to the view that God exists in time with creation, that he's temporal since the moment of creation, and timeless without creation. And that seems coherent because, like I said, if we agree with the argument at this point, that whatever begins to exist as a cause, and the universe began to exist, the cause must be timeless here. And there's certainly nothing, I don't see anything incoherent at least, about the idea of God being timeless without time. Time doesn't even exist. And in time, since time began to exist. That's the view I hold here, and I'd be interested to hear what your objection to that would be. Now, in response to the first argument I gave for the personhood of the first cause, I think you misunderstood the point of the illustration here. The point was to show that, when we ask for an explanation, we're asking the question, what caused the universe to exist, to begin to exist? And must we give a scientific explanation or a personal explanation for it? Now, remember, at this point in the argument here, we're conceding the soundness of the first two premises and the arguments supporting them. Now, if those are correct, the cause cannot be scientific, because to say that, you'd have to deny the second premise. But at this point in the argument, we're conceding the soundness of the second premise, as described, namely that the universe began from nothing. And we'll get into the definition of nothing, by the way, later in the video, since you seem to have a problem with that. But that's really what I'm trying to say here. You can't have a scientific explanation because the universe, all matter and energy, because science studies anything physical or within the universe, anything in the natural world, be that physical. But if all that came into being, then there can't be a scientific explanation for that. So yeah. You also, of course, made an interesting appeal to backward causation, referred to, I think, events that cause something to happen after it has happened, so thus couldn't the universe have begun to exist this way? No, because backward causation, wholly apart from my reservations about that, I don't think backward causation is ontologically possible, but that is a discussion for another video. However, the point is this here. Backward causation, in the sense that you're using it to describe how the universe began to exist, isn't even logically coherent. Because in order for backward causation to work, time has to exist. And remember, I'm going to repeat this again here, at this point in the argument, we're conceding here the soundness of the arguments for the second premise and the first. So that backward causation can't work because time didn't have a beginning. If there's no time, you can't have something in the future go backwards to cause some time to begin to exist. Thus, the whole appeal to backward causation as to explain the beginning of the universe is just logically incoherent because you have to have time in order for that to happen. But if time began to exist, then you can't use backward causation to explain the beginning of time. Now, you could always get out of this by appealing to the tenseless theory of time. I also have reservations about that, and that would take a whole other while to explain, and I don't know which view of time you hold to. But for the sake of this argument here, I'm simply conceding the tensed theory of time here. So I don't know if you're going to take that route or not. So now, in response to the second argument I gave for the person of the first cause, once again, your argument here was really not an objection against the Kalam argument so much as a positive argument for atheism here. You basically said that all the evidence we have for minds says that minds are physical, and there's no evidence that immaterial minds exist. And this, of course, takes us into the topic of mind-body dualism. But really, the objection here doesn't work because, first, what you would have to show is that an unembodied mind is incoherent, okay? Not just that there's no evidence for it. Because remember, if the Kalam argument here that I'm defending is sound, this is evidence for an unembodied mind. So what you would have to show in order for this objection to go through is you would have to show that the idea of an immaterial mind is incoherent. Not just that there's no evidence for it, but that it's incoherent, and you didn't do that. Now, I do think there are good arguments and good evidence for an immaterial mind, namely mind-body dualism, but that really is a topic for another video, though I do plan on making a video defending mind-body dualism, so if you're interested, you can stick around and watch that video when I get around to making it. Now, as for the definition of natural here, what it means when we say the natural world came into being, here's the thing. Perhaps you're aware of a view that's called naturalism, or materialism, or physicalism, call it whatever you want. I don't know if you hold to that, but it's usually what Alvin Plantinga would call like a strong atheism. Basically what this view holds is that matter, energy, and time and whatnot are all that exists. Anything that isn't physical doesn't exist, okay? That's what this view holds here, okay? Like that the natural world, as a naturalist would view it, again, I don't know if you are a naturalist, but if you are, then everything that you believe exists is part of a naturalistic worldview. Now, what I mean when I say the universe began to exist, the second premise of the Kalam argument is I mean that all of that came into existence. So it doesn't really help us here to say that the universe is part of a bubble universe, because that's still a physical thing. That is still permitted in a naturalist worldview because it's still physical and everything, okay? So this is really all I mean by the natural world. This is what I mean when I say the universe began to exist, okay?